Hello, this is the webinar about combined transport. The webinar is a part of the Combine project, which is co-financed by the European Regional Development Fund in the framework of the Interreg Baltic Sea Region 2014 to 2020.
Hi everybody, my name is Dominik Landa. I have the pleasure of being the commercial director for DCT Gdansk, the largest container terminal in the Baltics. And I have been at DCT Gdansk for over 10 years. Before, I have been working for Maersk Line, so I have both the operational and the commercial experience. And today, I was asked, and I happily agreed to do a webinar on the shipping. So there will be 6 chapters of the webinar. First of all, is the container shipping a part of intermodal combined chains or complementary but parallel structure? The second one is, how can impact the container terminal on shipping lines and the opposite way? What is the current capacity of container shipping towards container traffic? Which barriers do you see for the container shipping in the future? What kind of challenges do you see for the container shipping in the future? And then the last but not least, should we expect the increasing competition on the container terminals market in the Baltic Sea? Now, let me start with the first one. So, is the container shipping a part of intermodal combined chain or complementary but parallel structure? I think the container is intermodal. Without a container, there would not be an intermodal as we know it today. It all started many years ago. Obviously, it was still in the ancient times, then in the medieval times, then Napoleon Wars, then the English miners also invented sort of containers, boxes, wooden boxes. But the container, as we know it today, was invented in the 1950s. And it all started with the first sailing of the vessel called Ideal X. The Ideal X was a converted World War II tanker, the vessel that has been commercially used by Mr. Malcolm McLean, later known as the founder of the Sealand Company. Now, what Mr. McLean thought of was how to make sure that you can transport the goods in the most efficient way. How to make sure that whatever you discharge from the vessel is loaded on the truck or rail and continues its way to the final recipient. Now, the perfect answer was the box. The box was not the same as we know it today. The box was different dimensions, it looked differently, but the idea was exactly the same. The cargo was stuffed in a container, yet it was easy and much faster to reload it from a vessel and then load it on a truck or rail. Now, the containers have been obviously then certified and changed. We know them today as ISO containers, so they have the regular standard in terms of dimension, weight, capacity, and all kinds of features. So the containers that you see on roads and rail are exactly the ones that we are using in today modern container business. So that's for that reason alone, the container business is an internal part of the intermodal chain. Now, it's not a parallel structure. It has been developed as a part of intermodal and is today the intermodal per se. There are obviously the swap bodies, other types of joint packaging or the transportation units, but the container is the one that has been the most successful. Now, what made it so successful? The first of all is transportation costs are much lower. The insurance is much lower. The minimum load unit is also achieved. Now, the inventory cost is also improved. So you have the lower storage cost, you have the lower packaging cost, because you don't need to develop all kinds of packaging to make sure that your goods are arriving from China, for example, to Europe. Now, it's also much faster in terms of inventory turnover. Yet, the time reliability has improved tremendously, the transit time has improved, and then the higher frequency of transportation is also achieved. So, in a nutshell, the intermodal is the box. Now, going to the second topic, which is how can container terminal impact on container shipping lines and vice versa. Now, that's a very interesting question. Obviously, we live as container terminals and as shipping lines together. It's a symbiosis. So whatever the shipping line is requesting or whatever they are looking for is something that the terminal has to manage. Now, a container ship, when we look at the definition, is a cargo ship that carries all of its load in truck-sized intermodal containers or rail-sized intermodal containers in a technique called containerization. Now, container ships are a common means of commercial intermodal freight transport and now carry most seagoing non-bulk cargo. So as you can imagine, most of the trade, global trade, is done via the sea because that's the easiest and not the fastest, obviously, but the way to transport goods for longer distances. And it's also by far the most ecological one. Now, a container port is obviously a place where you handle different kinds of vehicles. So on one hand, you have the vessels. On the other hand, you have the landside transportation, which is truck, rail, or inland transportation, such as barges. Now, obviously, in container terminals, we do not only handle containers, but we also do all the additional services. We strip them, we stuff them, we store them, we monitor and reefer control. So all these elements that are requested by the customers, being the shipping lines or the BCOs, so the beneficial cargo owners, are the services that we render as a container terminal. Now, what do the lines need from a container terminal? That's a very interesting question. So the first thing is the access. That's what the shipping line wants. The shipping line is choosing the market to serve, taking into account the size of the population, the amount of containers generated by the economy. So when we look at the situation, DCT Gdansk is a perfect example on why the shipping lines have chosen to go to Gdansk. Because we have by far the fastest growing economy in Europe, Poland, Czech, Slovakia. So DCT Gdansk is the gateway to the fastest growing region in Europe. And the population is pretty big because Poland alone is 38 million. Then we have Czech Republic, then we have Slovakia, then we have our friends in Ukraine, Belarus. So all these countries, the hinterland countries, without the access to the sea, are predominantly the hinterland of DCT Gdansk. And that's the engine of growth, is the GDP growth and the population and the exchange in containers. Now, that's on the land side. We also have the seaside. So DCT Gdansk is not only the gateway, but also a hub to serve the Baltics. The Baltics, we mean Russia, Finland, the republics, Sweden, all ports and all countries by the Baltics where the large vessels cannot call. Now, so the shipping lines are looking predominantly for a place or a port that can handle their largest vessels with the lowest cost. Obviously, to make it happen, what we need infrastructure, we need capable water depth to allow the largest vessels afloat with the draft of 15 meters and more to come at all times. We need to have 365-day service. It has to be done day and night, no exceptions. And it has also to be, well, quite close to the primary shipping lines, right? So primary shipping routes. When you look at the Poland alone, it is generating 2.5 million TEUs. Now, if it was thousands and thousands of kilometers away from any near port, then obviously the cost would be much higher if it was Poland alone. But since Poland is in the forefront of Central East Europe and DCT Gdansk can also serve the Baltics as a hub, this means that the cost can be spread. And the market that you are serving as a shipping line is much wider. Now, the second element is obviously the efficiency. So the shipping lines are looking forward to have the shortest port stay that you can achieve. Why? Because the vessels are very expensive. The price per one vessel ranges in between of $150 million to $190 million a piece. Not to mention containers that you need to turn around, which are arriving or are supposed to leave on this vessel. The cost of making up, so speeding up of the vessel if the port is not performing is also very high. The vessel is consuming in between of 60 to in excess of 100 tons of fuel a day, which then means if a ton of a fuel is $500 on average, depending on the time, depending on the type of fuel, then you can see what kind of bill is generated. Now, how to achieve that? Obviously, we need to, as a container terminal, we need to provide a very high so-called vessel rate. So how fast can you work on a vessel? We need to make sure that the equipment is adequate. It has to be outreaching to the last row. The infrastructure has to be adequate, but also the equipment has to be adequate and even beyond what is required today. We need to have enough of the equipment, enough of the STS cranes, so ship-to-shore cranes. We need to have enough of the equipment working in the yard. Now, what we need also is we need to have an efficient gate service. So whatever comes from the sea has to leave on land. So on a truck or rail, or in future, potentially on a barge. So this is also one of the elements that is looked for by the lines. Now, obviously, EDI exchange, electronic exchange, our world is more digitized than ever before, and it will become even more so. So for that reason, we need to develop all kinds of ease of exchanging information. Now, the third element is the cost. So the lines are looking for the so-called TCO, total cost of ownership. So how expensive it is and how much do they pay to exchange a box in a given port. It is including the pilot dues, the towage dues, the port dues, all the terminal handling charges which are required, the distance from the hinterland, and all these elements. Now, payment terms, that's obviously something else that is required. In a high volume business like ours, it is important. The fourth element, obviously, is the connectivity. So it is great that the port can handle the vessel, but it also has to be well connected with the hinterland. If it's not connected, it can be only a hub, but not a gateway. Now, range of services. Yes, it's good that it's connected, but it also has to have services that are linking the port with the hinterland. For Poland, for example, we need to go from Gdansk to Silesia, to Wrocław, to central Poland, to East Poland. All the destinations which are inhabited by Polish citizens and beyond. Now, the last but not least is scalability. So it means when the shipping line is making an effort, an investment to call given port, it has to have a room to grow. It has to have enough space to grow their business. And that's what they are looking for. We need to have expansion plans as container terminals. And that's, in a nutshell, what the lines are expecting from us. Now, what has changed in the recent years? Obviously, the ships have been growing larger, which then means that if the ships are going larger, then the infrastructure has to be increased and improved. The STS cranes of yesterday are not good enough for the vessels of tomorrow. The infrastructure, which was good to cater for the vessels 20 years ago, is no match for the infrastructure that was built recently to make sure that it can serve the vessels of 400 meters in length. Now, the evolution of vessels. When you look at the vessel, for example, President Truman, 1988, it was the largest vessel afloat. I think it was from APL. And the size of the vessel was 4.5 thousand TEUs in capacity, 275 meters in length. 1988. What happened later? In the next 6 years, the vessels grew. So it was 300 meters in length. The NYK Alta. Then the Regina Maersk. Just 3 years later, again larger by 20 meters. Then Sovereign Maersk, 1997, the same year, 347 meters. Immer Maersk, 397 meters, 2006. So as you can see, the vessels have been growing. What does it mean? That the ports have to invest further and further. Now, what has changed in the past? In the past, the bargaining power of the shipping lines was 20 shipping lines approaching terminals. The negotiations looked much different. Now, with 3 alliances, which are combining all the lines, the situation is tilting towards the shipping lines. The bargaining power of a shipping line is much greater than the port, given there are several ports in the location. We have to remember that the shipping line can divert the vessels to a different port, but the port cannot move from the location it is today. Now, the next one is, what is the current capacity of container shipping towards container traffic? As of 2020, end of 2020, there were 5,371 vessels which were considered to be container vessels. Now, if you include all the vessels that are carrying containers, it has been 6,195. So that's a tremendous amount of vessels, which are considerably adding to the total fleet size globally. Now, the total capacity of these vessels is close to 24.5 million TEUs. And the deadweight tons, so the tonnage, is close to 300 million tons. The largest operator, Maersk Line, 712 ships, 4.1 million. The second one, MSC, 589 ships, 3.8 million. COSCO, CMA, all these carriers, the top 10 carriers, are responsible for more than 90% of the tonnage globally. Now, in terms of the regional trades, we have the 3 trades which can be distinguished. First one, transatlantic. The second one, Trans-Pacific, and the last but not least is the Far East Europe. Now, the largest of all of these is the Trans-Pacific. The weekly deployment is 566,000 TEUs. Now, the Far East is 415,000 TEUs, so the total tonnage deployed, and then the Transatlantic is only 143, which shows the trading between Europe, US, and the Far East. It just shows that US and the Far East are trading by far the most in containers, whereas Europe and US are trading only 1/3 or close to 1/4 of what is traded on the other side of the US. Now, 2020 was very much different year than any year before. The pandemic has struck, and the orders of the new tonnage have been completely wiped out. No new vessels, no new boxes were ordered, which then means that at a certain point of time, when the demand was going down, it was just following the regular practice, which then means that the shipping lines, when they were looking at the pandemic, nobody knew what's going to happen. So all the orders were cancelled or delayed. Now, what happened was that all of us, we were stuck home. We were looking to buy a new TV. We were looking to change things, to buy. We could not go to the pub. We could not go to the restaurant. We could not go for vacations. So what we started to do is to buy and buy online. Now, suddenly, the factories were producing much more, and the demand has grown. What happened was, no new vessels, no new containers. The demand has increased, which then means that the sea freight has gone up. The sea freight has gone up from, for example, from Shanghai to Santos in Brazil. The 2019 and 2020, beginning of 2020 rate was $500 per container. Now, last year, end of 2020, the rate has gone to $5,000, 10 times more, for exactly the same container, for exactly the same route, for exactly the same transit. At the same time, the schedule reliability and the service offering has tremendously decreased because of the congestion in the ports and the availability of the boxes. Now, What happened was that the amount of demand, or the demand for the container services, has gone up. The offering has gone down, which then means that the sea freight has gone up tremendously. The shipping lines decided to make sure that they have adequate tonnage, adequate amount of vessels, amount of containers. What happened was that they've started to place orders. And in Q1 2021, they've ordered a record amount of vessels. Now, in the first quarter only, the owners, so the shipping lines, have ordered 1.4 million TEU of capacity. Let me remind you that the total capacity in the business is in excess of 24 million TEUs. So only in one quarter, so much of a tonnage was ordered, and it's not the end. Now, obviously, this is the vessel, but also the containers. Last year, no new containers. This year, what you see is that shipping lines are ordering a lot of containers, many more. Hapag-Lloyd has just placed an order for $550 million in containers. 150,000 TEUs of regular containers plus 8,000 TEUs of specialized containers were ordered. Now, what we will see as a result is that the shipping lines, now Maersk Line number 1, MSC number 2, COSCO number 3, CMA number 4, we will see the change. And the change will be that Maersk decided not to build any new vessels, yet MSC continues to buy. So most likely, after so many years, by end of 2022, we will see the change in the first position. So most likely, MSC will replace Maersk as the leader in terms of container shipping industry, in terms of tonnage. Now, what the lines can do when they have not enough vessels? Well, they increase the rates, that's obvious. What else they can do? They can scrap out all these old vessels that were not used and to use them, and that's what we have right now. The idle container ship fleet today is at the lowest possible level. So the higher the sea freight rate is, the lowest is the container vessel idling amount. Now, what they can also do, if the times are tough and if the business goes south, if there are too many vessels, yet demand is not there, and this is what we've seen in the past, they can scrap the tonnage. So almost new vessels are going to scrap, especially the ones which are not very efficient, very fast. This is what happened with some of the vessels which were developed to serve the US and China. They were very fast. They were very, like clippers in the past. So the transit time was the key, but then they were consuming a lot of fuel. Guess what happened to them? No longer afloat. Now, not only scrapping, but also idling, obviously, yes. There's a famous picture of what happened in the recent crisis when there were thousands of vessels idling in front of the port of Singapore and many other ports. Now, what else can be done? Slow steaming. So the shipping line can save cost on the bunker, so the fuel, yet it means that you need to deploy more vessels to cater for a weekly service, which then means that you find work for these vessels which were obsolete at that point of time. This is what the situation is today. Obviously, the situation for business in 2021 is booming for the shipping lines. Maybe not so much for the BCOs, but for the shipping lines definitely it is. The highest sea freight rates, which we see today, the utilization of the fleet is the highest. One of the records that was recently announced was the CMA CGM Jacques de Sade was loaded with a record amount of containers in excess of 21,000 TEUs. Obviously, the vessel cannot be loaded with 100% of its nominal capacity. So the 92% which this vessel hit was the highest ever. Now, the fourth question was, what kind of challenges do you see for the container shipping in the future? Well, First of all, let us start with the demand and supply balance. Obviously, the shipping lines are now buying a lot of, or ordering new vessels, ordering new equipment. And it's all good. What will happen when the demand is no longer there? The rates will go down, which obviously is something that the customers are looking for. And the shipping lines will again start a fight to make sure that they can utilize their very expensive, new, beautiful vessels. Which then means that obviously they will be looking to develop new services, but I think this will not outweigh the situation where you need to have a responsible growth, which in the past has not been so well seen, because it's very difficult. If you order a vessel, you need 1.5, 2 years to have it, which then means the situation can be much different from it was at the time of ordering. Now, the second element that I think is the challenge for the container business is obviously the improvement of the schedule reliability. The schedule reliability today has dropped to record low level. In December, it was 44.6%. What do we mean by schedule reliability? It means that the vessel that is aimed or is supposed to arrive to the port is arriving not less than 1 day later. So if you look at this situation today, means that more than half of the vessels are arriving later than 1 day as they were originally planned. Now, in January 2021, the situation has gone even worse off, 34%, which then means it's not improving. And you know, what happens is that some of the lines are saying, we are not getting the money to be on time. Which means that if you have to speed up and if you have to make sure that the vessels are coming on time, the money at this stage will not solve it. I mean, the sea freight is super high. So how to make them to come on time? I think this will be the challenge for the lines themselves once the situation is changing, once the demand is not as strong as it is today. Now, I think one of the most important elements is what will the lines do in order to cater for the environmental issues. As we know, environment is the key for all of us. We all live on this beautiful blue planet. Now, the container shipping is obviously one of the most ecological ways of transporting the goods for longer distances. It's on the sea, the vessels are pretty new, and it's very much standardized. Now, when we look at the regulations which are coming into play by IMO, International Maritime Organization, the vessels are supposed to burn much more environment-friendly fuel, so less sulfur, emit less CO2, and the carbon footprint of the shipping should go down tremendously. Some of the lines have acquired a target that by 2050 or by 2030, they will be carbon neutral. How are they going to achieve it? Well, first of all, currently the lines are installing the so-called scrubbers. So the filters which are cleaning the air which is exhausted from the engine. Now, there are only few producers of the scrubbers in the world. Obviously, there's a number of shipyards, that you can do the retrofitting, but they're all full. And the container fleet, let me just remind you, it's more than 6,000 units. And most of them are not adhering or used to not adhere to the regulations. So that's number one. Installing scrubber means you are taking out some of the capacity of the vessel. It is the cost, not only the cost of not being able to travel for a couple of weeks, but also the cost of a scrubber, and also the cost that you will have in the future. The vessel, which was supposed to be carrying 15,000 containers, will carry only 14.5 or something alike. Now, the next element is LNG. So LNG is much more friendly than the bunker. And the LNG at the moment is the so-called fuel of the future. So CMA CGM as a group decided to build the newest beautiful vessels just powered with LNG. which is all good, but it's just one line, it's just one series of vessels, the extra large ones. What happened was in the past, UASC, so United Arab Shipping Corporation, now part of the Hapag-Lloyd, has also had some of the LNG ready vessels, but it only means that the engines were capable of burning LNG. Now at the moment, in March of 2021, one of the vessels, the Sajir, was retrofitted with the LNG tank. The cost, $35 million for one vessel, and obviously some of the capacity being lost. However, this is the future, most likely, that will happen. There are other ways, using methanol, using wind power as well, but all these are still in a process. At some point of time, the nuclear power was considered, but for many reasons, it was not coming into force. Now, another element that will be the challenge is the competition between the modes, because at the moment, the shipping lines and the vessels are getting larger and larger. Now, they are now grown to 400 meters in length. They can go as deep as to 15.5 meters, 16 meters in draft. They are wide up to 60 meters. It's all great and the unit cost is achieved, but the transit time that the intercontinental rail, for example, is offering is unbeatable. So from the China to Europe, you can go in 9, 11, 14 days, which then means that compared to the regular service, which is 32, 40 days, it's much faster. Obviously, not all the goods will be achieving this, but with the ongoing investments in the rail infrastructure, that's going to be a challenge for the shipping lines. Some of them are entering this, some of them are increasing the transit speed. There was a famous, very fast service from HMM, which was cutting at least a week from the Far East to Europe. So these are all the elements that they will need to see. And the last but not least is the near production. So the customers who have been doing a lot of business with China, placing all the eggs in one basket, so all the factories in China, they realize that if something goes south, then obviously you're stuck. You don't have any more supplies. So diversification of the production is one element that is now happening, and especially in the Southeast Asian countries. And the second element is bringing the production closer to Europe for several reasons. One is the growing cost of production in China, which has now matched or even surpassed the East and Central Europe costs, especially when you look at the Shanghai region and the region which is now the production area, so the Pearl Delta River. And this means that the consideration to move the production closer to the low-cost countries in Europe is also something that the shipping lines would need to counter. Now, in terms of the next element, the barriers for the container shipping in the future, I think there are only several. First of all is the construction of the vessel itself. The vessels cannot grow to the amounts that you can see in the movies, science fiction movies, at least not now, not today, not with today's technological advancement. Now, there was a famous vessel called Lewis, or Jare Viking, which was the tanker and the largest vessel of its kind. It was built in 1981. She was 458 meters in length. She was so big that she could not enter any of the ports, which then means that as an oil tanker, the unit cost of bringing the crude oil from Middle East to any given location was by far the lowest. But she could not enter any of the ports because the infrastructure was not ready. Now, the Jare Viking, although she was big and she could carry a record amount of barrels on board, she didn't precede the extra super huge amount of tankers that could enter into service. Why? Because she was just too big. In terms of specification, she could be doing well a job, and she was carrying the barrels from one place to another, the oil, crude oil, but she was too big. The infrastructure was not ready. And the same goes for the container business. Currently, 400 meters, about 60 meters in width is the maximum that the ports can handle. There are only few ports that can handle these vessels. When you look at Europe, only the major hubs can handle these vessels without any restrictions. One of them is Gdansk. Now, if the shipping lines want to grow beyond, then the ports would need to invest a substantial amount of money all across the world to make it happen, to make sure that they can efficiently serve these. Whether they would do it, I think that's a barrier. Now, the second element, obviously the construction. As I said about the other Viking, yes, she was 458 meters, so almost 60 meters bigger than the container ships of today. Still, the container ships, they do break. Obviously, that's the fault in design. This is not happening on a regular basis. This is just an accident in a given special circumstances, but it just shows that they are fragile. They can't go through ice. They are rather adverse to very difficult weather conditions. Huge, yes, they look majestic, but still, any meter added in terms of length and width is adding also to the stress of the construction. Obviously, it will change. At the moment, the 400 meter is the technological, in terms of the cost of production, is the max. Now, the last, I think, but not least, themes that I was supposed to address today is: should we expect the increased competition on the container market in the Baltic Sea? And there's no easy answer on this. There are several projects which are happening at this moment in the Baltic Sea. We know about the new terminal being built close to Stockholm in Sweden. We know about the new developments which are happening also in Denmark. Obviously, these two are not meant to be the hubs or the gateways, but these are the regional ports. Now, what does it take to decide to build a new container port? It's a lot of money involved. That's number one. Now, if you are to put your money or your shareholders' money, you need to make sure that the return is there. So the locations that you will be choosing are the locations which provide the access to the large market, which would be interesting for your customers, being the shipping lines. Now, when you look at DCT Gdansk, as I explained, before, DCT is the gateway to Central East Europe, the growing region, strong region, a lot of population, a lot of growth in terms of containerized business. Let's take, for example, another port in the Baltics, any of the ports in the republics or any other place, for example, Sweden. Now, if you are to build a port in these locations, what you need to consider is, will you be serving only your local market? For example, Sweden, you have a lot of industry, you have strong population, buying power, for sure. You also have the competition, but that's something that you would consider. Now, if you look at the investments, for example, in any of the smaller terminals or smaller ports or smaller states, let's say Baltic states, you need to take into account that there's about 3 million citizens. So, and that's number one. So the local market is pretty small. Now, the transit market, it all depends on Russia, whether Russia would like to use the ports or the Russian customers would like to use the ports, be it inland, Gdansk or Klaipėda or Riga or any other port. I think the situation is pretty normal that every country would like to support its own ports. So St. Petersburg grows and the flows are directed through the Russian port. If you look at the competing ports in the Baltic states, will they have enough critical mass of volume? It all depends. But that's one of the reasons why there are no so many investments planned in terms of the hubbing or gateway concept in the Baltics. Obviously, the competition will grow. This market will be moving forward. The new projects will emerge. Even if we are not hearing about them today, we will hear about them tomorrow. For that reason, DCT is also looking into growing the amount of capacity that can be offered to customers. We believe there will be enough. Although when you hear about, for example, the Polish economy, today Polish economy is generating 2.5 million TEUs. Now, even if you take into account 7% growth year on year, in 2030 it's going to be 5 million TEUs. So with the capacity of the container terminals and the planned development of the terminal in Gdansk, there will be more than adequate offering for the shipping lines. Now, obviously, as I said, it's all about the money. So if there's a private company fund that wants to invest, it will carefully review the options. It will carefully see whether it makes sense or no make sense to invest into a certain location. For that reason, and for that reason alone, it will take additional time for the funds or for anybody to invest so much of money in a new infrastructure. And it will mean that some of the ports, if they will emerge, we will know about this fact as customers, as the citizens of the Baltic Sea region in a due course. But I don't think that in the near future there will be an immediate new project that will be set up to cater for the container growth in the Baltic. Although competition is good, competition is something that makes the trade stronger and makes you as a company even stronger than before. Thank you very much.